Hello and welcome to a 3 looks, 3 palettes video. In case you're new here, my name is Noopur and I love indie makeup and all things color and sparkle. I'm trying to keep this intro short because I just want to dive right into the looks, but before we get into that, I would really love it if you could give this video a like and consider subscribing if you aren't already subscribed because I would love to have you stick around. The first look is using the Gourmande Girls Call of the Sirens palette, and then the second look is using this Kryptein Cosmetics Secret Garden 1 palette, but I also dip into Secret Garden 2 just a little bit. And then the third look is using the Wicked Widow Beauty American Psycho palette. And that's the look that I'm wearing right now. As I'm doing each look, I'll talk you through how things are performing and also give you some brief thoughts on each palette. Also, just a quick disclosure, I did receive all of these palettes in PR, and I also have codes with all 3 of these brands, I think, so I'll leave that information in the description box. And now let's get into look number 1. For look number 1, I'm going to be using the Gourmande Girls Call of the Sirens palette, which just launched yesterday as I'm filming this video. But here's the inside. It's this beautiful mermaid siren themed color story, and I know that I want to do a look for short form using more of the bluish shades, so I actually think I'm going to use some of like the pinky purple shades for today's look. Just in case you're new to my channel, the way that I do my tutorials is I'm going to be showing you the application on this eye, but I'll already have the step that I'm showing you completed on this eye. That way you can see what I'm working towards. So I'm going to start by picking up this pastel pink shade, and I'm going to start by focusing it here in the innermost part of my crease and then slowly feathering it outwards. I want a pretty soft wash of this, but as you know, I already did it on this eye. This shade did take a little bit of work to build up on this eye with my usual method of slowly building as I blend out. And so I picked up a little bit more for this eye on the brush. Dipped in one more time. And I mean, it is a pastel shade, and pastels aren't always the build and blend type of formula, so I'm not surprised that this took a little bit more effort to build up, especially on my skin tone. I am also feathering it out this way, but kind of tapering it off, just to give the next shade something to blend into. Now I'm going to pick up this purple shade over here, and I'm going to start by applying that here in my socket first, really getting most of that pigment there. And then taking whatever's left in the brush and slowly bringing it outwards, but also bringing it inwards. I am going to be covering up a lot of that pastel pink that I put down first, but I didn't want the purple to go on as deep as it is in the pan, which is why I put that pastel pink in the front part. So I'm just going to slowly keep blending that until I'm happy with it. So now I picked up just a little bit more, and I'm going to focus this on the outer corner here. Really just trying to get that there softly. I am going to add a bit more depth on top of this, but again, I don't want that shade to go on too dark either, so I'm first focusing on blending this purple out. I'm also taking that same purple on a little smudge brush like this, and I'm going to run it along the lower lash line, but just concentrating it on the outer part of the lower lash line. And I really only dipped in that one time because I don't want it to get too pigmented or like too deep out here just yet. I'm also going to dip back into this pastel pink and use that to blend the purple further in. I feel like purples are notoriously hard to formulate and sometimes they blend out a little patchy, but I feel like this is blending out really well, especially considering I didn't use a pastel shade to blend this out. Like, this was blended out all on its own. Now I'm going to take this shade over here for even more depth. I feel like it looks really dark in the viewfinder. I don't know what this is going to look like once I actually start editing it, but this is a very deep plum shade. I feel like this one over here is a more cool toned purple, and this one over here is much more plummy. So I'm going to start by packing that onto the outer corner, or the outer like third of my lid in a diagonal shape like this. Just because this is so deep, I want to focus it over here where it has potential to be covered up by shimmer. And then I'm going to start like slowly tapping it out and also blending into that previous purple, but not too far out. I really want to keep the depth right here. Just making sure there's, you know, no harshness between the purple shades. Then using that first brush and just kind of doing tiny little movements here to take care of this like kind of disconnect that I saw. Taking that same deepening shade on a very tiny little pencil brush, and I'm just going to smudge it very close to my lash line here. Like that's it. So now it's shimmer time, and I must use this hollow shade that everyone's going nuts over. It is extremely foiled, but a little bit textured, so I'm very curious how this is going to apply to the lid. So as I suspected, this shade does apply better with a finger than a brush. So I started with my finger and I applied it over most of my lid. I am going to keep this outer area blank for a different shade, but I did use my finger to get the bulk of the shade on first. And now I'm switching to a brush, but I am going to make sure to kind of tap it off a little bit because this shade is very prone to fall out. But I do enjoy a brush for applying it a bit more sheerly, especially as I get closer to my crease and closer to the mattes. I don't really like there to be a harsh line where the shimmer stops and where the mattes start, so I prefer using a brush in this area to kind of sheer it out a bit. This shimmer is so interesting because I feel like if you apply it very opaquely, it's going to be extremely metallic and reflective, like a very foiled finish. But then if you apply it a bit more sheerly with a brush, it's going to be more sparkly and twinkly, but you can see through a little bit. Like it's not going to go on opaquely, but because of the texture, I feel like instead of being this like ethereal wash of sparkle, it's more of like a dispersed, I don't want to say chunky, but yeah, kind of chunky sparkle. But there is pigment in the base of it. It's not like a sparkle over a completely sheer base. And so even, you know, at the very top of my lid here, where it's a bit more of a diffuse sparkle, I can still see some pink underneath it from that base, which is good. So now for the rest of my lid, I'm going to dip into this shade over here. I'm going to apply this mostly on the outer third of my lid like this. I'm going to really pack it on over here, but then I'm also going to bring it in a little bit over that first hollow shade to kind of blend it into that and make sure that it's not like super metallic all over my lid, if that makes sense. I really like how the two of these shades mix together because I feel like this one is super light and bright and this one has a bit of a deeper base and it's not as sparkly, so it works really well in the outer corner, I feel like, but then as it mixes in with the sparkle of the hollow shade, it just makes like a whole brand new effect. Also, I didn't mention this, but the hollow sparkle in the first shimmer is very visible, but I do think that part of that is because I'm not wearing this shadow super opaquely. I feel like if I was to wear it like opaquely over my entire lid, it would obscure a little bit of the hollow sparkles, but especially in the sections where I've diffused it out, I can really see it there. So now for the inner corner, I'm actually going to dip into the Mermaid Magic palette that was also launched at the same time as the Call of the Sirens palette. And this is a face palette. So we have 3 highlighter shades up top and then 3 blushes at the bottom, but I'm actually going to use this shade right here for my inner corner. I'm doing my usual placement, just like the inner corner, down here and running it up through the swoop. That is super pretty. It's a very fine sparkle, so I do think that this would work really well as a face highlighter. I just don't really like to wear formulas like this on my cheeks as highlighter because I also just like don't wear a ton of highlighter, period. And so I prefer to use products like this on my eyes. I also feel like specifically with this shade, as long as I don't put on too much of it, I'm not seeing a white cast, which is great if you actually do want to use it as a highlighter. So I usually just do my eyes for these types of videos, but since this is a face palette, I do want to try using some of these blushes on camera. I was very intrigued by this purple blush when I first saw it, but I actually think that it has too much white pigment in it to work on my skin. So I think I'm going to mix the pink and the purple blushes together. And since I picked up quite a lot, I'm going to like dust some of it off first. And now I can go onto my cheeks with it. Okay, together they are very pretty because I do think that this type of pink doesn't necessarily look like the best on me on its own. I feel like pinks with a little bit of purple in them work really well in my skin tone, so I'm very glad that I mixed them because I love how this blush looks. It is quite a matte blush, and I don't feel like it looks super matte on my cheeks right now because I have a bit of a glowy base on, but I do think it makes sense to have matte blushes in this palette because there are also highlighters in this palette, and I think if you had glowy blushes, you wouldn't necessarily want to use a highlighter with it. So here's the look completed with the lip and mascara on. And really quickly, for all 3 looks in today's video, I'll have, complete other makeup details in the description box. And here is the sparkle cam so that you can see all of that delicious texture, especially the inner corner and swoop, like that gold over there. It's so pretty. But then I also think that this lighting brings out the hollow sparkle a bit better. Even though it is visible in most lightings, I feel like it's just sometimes hard to translate on camera. And then the other thing that you can see with this lighting is that the pink shade that I put on the outer edge of my eyelid shifts to a gold, which you can see that gold shift right there. I'm really happy with this look. I think it's so pretty. I am, a big lover of pink and purple tones like this, so obviously I'm biased, but I will say I was a little concerned when I swatched this palette because the matte formula just felt a little bit different than I'm used to from Gourmande Girls. So I have a video that I did pretty recently on my account where I tried out 4 of their palettes. So in doing that, I became pretty familiar with the formula, and the mattes in this palette just seemed a touch drier than those other mattes, but performance wise, at least the colors that I used today worked really well. So I'm very happy about that. I'm going to pop up some swatches that I did of this palette right now, just so you can see the entire color story all together. I think it's so pretty, and I definitely get like under the sea vibes from the palette, like kind of like Little Mermaid-esque, maybe not quite as colorful as that song, but I do think that this palette works for an under the sea mermaid underwater type of palette. But overall, really happy with this palette so far. Of course, I've only done this look, but I am planning on using this to do another look for short form, which again, I do post all of my video short form content over on YouTube Shorts, so you can always go check there for more looks with any of the palettes that I feature here, or even palettes that I may not have spoken about in my long form content. I will usually have at least a short form tutorial with them. So for look number 2, I'm going to be using the Kryptein Cosmetics Secret Garden 1 palette. So this one is the more warm tone one, as you can see over here, but I do also have the Secret Garden 2 palette, which is the more cool toned one, and I've done short form looks with both of these palettes, which you can find on the shorts tab of my account, but I did also want to do at least one look for long form. Also, I just washed my hair, so it's still drying and it's slowly forming like the gel cast and it's getting crunchy, which is why it doesn't look the way that it usually does when I'm filming. Let's hop right into the look. I'm going to start by picking up this mustardy shade over here. So I'm going to start by running this through my crease, and Kryptein's matte formula is pretty powdery, so I usually have to make sure to tap off my brush pretty well before applying it, but it really doesn't bother me because they are so pigmented. For a mustard shade, that was one dip, and I did, dip in a little bit more than maybe I usually do because I have used this palette plenty of times before. I know how the mustard performs, but that is like, it's showing up on my skin tone, which I feel like with mustards, it's always a guessing game whether it'll show up. I'm also making sure to really get it in this area, this socket of my eye, and bring it down just like a touch onto the lid. Not a lot, but I am actually going to be putting a matte on my lid, so I want there to be a good blend between the two. Now for the second matte, I'm dipping into this reddish maroon shade over here. And I don't actually want a ton of pigment on my brush, so I'm going to tap off a little bit on the back of my hand. Now I'm going to start laying this down all over my lid, and I could have just picked up less pigment on the brush instead of dipping it in to get that much pigment on it, but I wanted the brush to be like evenly coated in the pigment but just have less of it. And I find that if I tap the brush in lightly, I risk, not all of the bristles being coated evenly, if that makes sense. So I like to do it this way. I'm getting the bulk of the pigment at, the lash line over here, and as there's less left on the brush, I'm feathering it upwards and outwards as well. And I'm even getting it in this very inner corner because I want this to be the base for the shimmer that I'm going to be putting on top. Now I'm switching to a clean, smaller brush, and I'm using this to blend the red shade with the mustard shade. I don't want there to be too much of a blend going on here because, like I said, the red is going to get covered up with a shimmer, but I don't want there to be a super harsh line between the two mattes. And for my eye shape, I try to keep, the blend hidden a bit right here in my socket because when I look up like this, that part gets hidden anyway. And for my lower lash line, I'm going to take this pink matte over here. And I'm just running this all the way from the inner portion towards the outer portion Then dipping back into this reddish shade again, and this time I'm focusing it just on the outer portion of my lower lash line, blending it into that pink shade a little bit, but then also bringing it out into the inner corner over here, or into the outer corner over here. Kryptein's mattes are always so wonderful to work with. They're ultra pigmented but super blendable, and I think as long as you're not, opposed to having a little bit of powderiness with your mattes, you'll probably enjoy this formula. I find it really, really nice. So now for the lid shimmer, I have absolutely fallen in love with this shade over here. It is just so beautiful and fiery and shifty, and it's on this kind of like slightly grayish base, so I find that it works really well with a bunch of different mattes, and that's also why I wanted to put this reddish shade down first, because I wanted the base to be a bit more warm toned. This is a bit of a textured shade, and you don't want to pick up too much of it or it'll look a little, crepey on your eyes, I think, and so you have to be careful. Just pick up a little bit, and I like to tap it in like this instead of swiping it on, and I really like to do this with most of my shimmers. I just find that they apply a lot better, and I like to finish a lot more. And then per usual, I'm switching to a brush to get the inner corner or the inner part of my eyelid, and also to sheer the shimmer out as I bring it up towards the crease. And same thing for the outer edge of my lid. So I need to talk about something when it comes to the shimmer that I used today, which is, again, this one over here, but this also applies to this shimmer over here, and especially this one over here, as well as one of the shimmers in the other Secret Garden palette, this pinkish one over here. So all of these shimmers are a bit on the textured side, but also they border on being overly emollient, which typically means people who experience creasing could experience creasing with these shimmers. And for me personally, I just don't really struggle with creasing, and I have worn this shimmer as well as the green one for long periods of time. For this one, I think I wore it for like over 12 hours because I was out all day that day, and I'm a night owl, so I didn't wash my face until much, much later. For the green one, I think I wore it closer to like 8 hours, I want to say. Neither of them creased on me, but I just don't really struggle with that. But I did want to point out the texture for those of you who do struggle with creasing, just in case you were thinking about picking up these palettes. Now for my inner corner, I really want a contrasting shimmer over here, just because this entire look is so warm toned, but the problem is that all of the shimmers in Secret Garden 1 are also warm toned, so I'm actually going to dip into Secret Garden 2 and pick up this shimmer over here. This shimmer has a very sheer pink base, so it works well in the inner corner for me since the pink base doesn't show up, but the shimmer is a little bit textured, so I like to work in really, really small layers so it doesn't build up too quickly and look too chunky. And hopefully you can see it's got that sheer pink base, but the sparkles are more blue and purple and a little pink as well, so very cool toned, and I just think it works really well with the warm tones that I have going on with the rest of the look. Here's the final look. I actually ended up adding a small amount of a smudgy eyeshadow liner very, very close to my lash line, because usually I like to add a lot of depth in my looks, but with this look, it's pretty soft. At least for me, this is pretty soft, so I felt like I needed to add a little bit of eyeliner to feel comfortable in the look. As usual, here's the sparkle cam so you can see this beautiful fiery goodness. The thing with textured shadows is they just catch the light in a totally different way than smooth shimmers do, and I feel like it looks more overtly glittery than a smooth shadow would, and it's just like a different kind of finish, and I know it's not for everyone, but I do really enjoy it. And I think you can see the blue sparkle from the inner corner shade as well, and all of those gorgeous shifts. So, so pretty. Okay, let me talk about these two palettes from Kryptein really quickly. I think that they are such a good spring release from the brand. I really love that there's a bit more of a warm toned one and a cool toned one, depending on what you want. And lately, I've been really gravitating towards cool tones with like colorful mattes at least, and I thought that I would like that palette more, but I actually ended up liking Secret Garden 1 with the warm tones a lot more. I just feel like these tones scream spring to me, and like just freshness and like green and flowers, and they just, I don't know, the tones make me so, so happy. But I also think that the quality is really good. The mattes are right on par with previous palettes. Really the only thing of note to me is that several of the shimmers, like I mentioned, are a bit more on the textured and emollient side, so you just need to be a little bit careful while applying them, but you can absolutely get like a very, very beautiful finish from them. I also really quickly want to touch on the fact that Kryptein has stopped shipping orders to the US. So if you're located in the US, you can no longer order from Kryptein Cosmetics. And I don't know if this is going to be like a temporary thing and if the brand is looking for a solution, or whether this is just permanent until further notice, because this does have to do with the tariffs increase with China, because Kryptein is a Chinese brand. They ship out of China. And so if you're in the US, you just can't order from them anymore. But I debated if I even wanted to do a look with these palettes for YouTube, because if you're in the US, you can no longer get them. But then I'm like, not everyone who watches me is in the US. And also, you know, I'm hopeful that the brand will be able to figure out a solution, because I know that Shall We Makeup, which is another Chinese beauty brand, they had also temporarily paused orders to the US, but they were able to figure out some kind of workaround, and orders are back on again, at least until some point in May, I think. So I'm really hopeful that the Chinese brands will be able to figure out some kind of solution. For my third look, I'm going to be using the very newly released Wicked Widow Beauty American Psycho palette, which I know a lot of you have been very, excited for and interested in. So I hope, doing a look with this will be helpful. I pretty much already know what I want to do with this palette, because it is a matte heavy palette. There's only 5 shimmers in the palette, and I know which shimmers I want to use, so I kind of just chose the mattes that I want around those shimmers. I'm going to start by dipping into this like muted sage green over here. And per usual, I'm just starting by running this through my crease. So this shade did take quite a few layers to build up to the pigment level that you're seeing over here, which I'm not super surprised by, because it is quite a bit of a lighter shade, and greens like this, I feel like they have a harder time showing up on me because I have an olive undertone, so I feel like they're just more likely to kind of just blend into my skin tone. And it's not like, I'm sitting here doing tens and tens of layers to get to this pigment level. It was just, I did, I think, 3 dips, and I am more of a build and blend girly, as I always say, so I feel like that's pretty normal for me. I did accidentally dip my brush into the blue shimmer when I was doing this eye, so if you see a little bit of blue shimmer in my crease, just know that that's why it's there. Now I'm going to be dipping into this green shade over here. I'm going to pack this pretty heavily on the outer corner over here, and then start blending it into the other shade. I was a little worried that this shade would not blend as well into that sagey green shade, because there's quite a difference in their depth levels. This is like almost bordering on being like a murky pastel, versus this is quite a deep green, but they did actually blend really well together. Although that is why I took the lighter shade like all the way over here. But like less pigment is over here. I do that a lot when there's quite a bit of difference in depth levels, just to ensure a really good blend. I'm also really happy with how this green is blending out. I won't say totally on its own, because I did take that lighter matte, till out here, but right over in this exact section over here, there isn't any other matte. It's just the dark green. And I feel like it's fading out really, really well. So I was looking at this really up close in my mirror, and in this spot right over here, I feel like the sage green matte had like a little bit of a harder time sticking down evenly. And like I said, I put less pigment in this area. Like I feel like I concentrated the bulk of the pigment over here and then sort of feathered it outwards over here. And I just feel like it didn't really stick down in a fully even layer, if that makes sense. But I don't want to pack on more pigment, because I do want it to remain just sort of a soft wash over there. So I'm going to try blending it out now. I'm using just the same brush as I did before, and I'm trying to keep it just right here so that I don't get too much of the dark green mixed into it, but I feel like now that it's stuck down, it might be hard to blend. I was actually able to get it to blend pretty well, so I'm actually happy with this matte work for now. Now I'm going to switch to the lower lash line, and I'm going to dip into this blue shade over here. I'm running this shade all along my lower lash line. Well, not all along it actually. I'm focusing it right here and then putting it softly over here, but keeping it pretty tight to the lower lash line, since it is quite a bold and deep color. I'm building up another layer of this, and when I swatched this blue, it went on not as pigmented and smoothly as the other shades, which is very typical for bright blues like this. Like, this is not unique to just Wicked Widow. I've had this experience with a bunch of different bright blue mattes, but typically these shades will apply well over primer, or like when you're applying them on my eye, because I swatch on bare skin, which is why they go on not as evenly. And I don't even have eye primer underneath my eye. I just have my concealer set with powder, and it is somewhat of like a yellowy powder. So I feel like it's mixing with the blue to make it go on not as true to pan, if that makes sense. Like I feel like if I applied the blue onto my actual lid over just regular eye primer, it would go on a lot more true blue. But it's not like it looks too muddy or anything, because it definitely does read as blue, but not as bright of a blue as it is in the pan, if that makes sense. In any case, my plan was always to cover it up with this blue shimmer over here. And I am going to spray my brush with a little bit of Fix Plus just to make sure that I get less fallout down there. I actually ended up switching to a slightly smaller brush because I want to be really precise right here in the lower inner part of my lower inner corner, the inner part of my lower lash line. This spot right here. And after packing most of the pigment over here, I'm just going to take it slowly along the rest of the lash line. This shimmer looks so pretty on the lower lash line. I really love using blue, red, actually most shades of shimmer on my lower lash line. I just feel like because my under eyes kind of like sink in a little bit, sometimes like mattes tend to get eaten up over here, especially in like lower lighting situations. You can't really tell what the exact color is. It just looks like a shadow. So I find that putting a shimmer over there makes the color more obvious. But due to the nature of my eyes and the little creases that I have underneath, over time the shimmer does tend to like transfer and kind of like settle into these creases and even go a little bit lower. So I kind of reserve doing this technique for when I'm doing a very bold and like smokier, more colorful eye look, because then I don't mind if there's just a little bit of like messiness around the eye. Now I'm going to do shimmers for my lid, and this is kind of what I based my entire look around, because I got a comment from someone recently. I can't remember which video it was on, but they were asking me to do my shade cascade technique, which if you don't know what that is, that's just a term that I made up for layering eyeshadows on top of each other. It could be, you know, mattes plus shimmers, mattes plus mattes, or shimmers plus shimmers. And I think this person was specifically asking for shimmer plus shimmer layering, which is the main way that I use the term. And I feel like this palette in particular is going to be really good for this technique, because I'm thinking specifically of using this shimmer as the base, because it is less sparkly than the other shades in this palette. It's not quite a satin, because you can see it's quite shiny still, but it's just not as sparkly or as textured as the other shades. So I'm going to be using this as my base shimmer. This is quite a deep shimmer, so I'm going to concentrate most of the pigment on the outer 2/3 of my lid, and using my finger is going to give me maximum pigment, of course. And then I'm going to switch to a brush and use that to apply less pigment on the inner third, just because I don't want it to be as dark over here, but you know, you don't have to do it like this. And then I'm also using the brush to shear out the green shimmer as I take it upwards towards the crease. When I do my shade cascade technique, I do like to work in really thin layers for the shimmers, just so that it's not too heavy or textured or anything on my eyelid. This is the shimmer that I'm going to layer on top, and keeping in mind that we want to work in very thin, light layers, I'm going to tap very lightly into this shade. So I've already done this eye, but before I go ahead and do this one on camera and show you how I apply the shimmer, I just want you to see the difference between my two eyes right now, because you can see this one has the silver shimmer on top, and I don't really know if it's going to pick up fully on camera, but in person it has such a dimensional effect. And one of the reasons that I wanted to use this shimmer and not this one to layer over the green shade is because this one has no base to it. It's got this very wet look to it, and it's kind of topper-like. I could have used this one to layer over the green shimmer, and I did test this on the back of my hand, but because the shimmer has more of a base, it kind of changed the overall tone of this, which is a really fun effect, and on another day I might actually try that, but today I really wanted to use a sheer topper. And the other reason I wanted to use this is because this one up here is more of like a dirty silver, so it is still pretty cool tone, but it leans warmer than this shade does. This one is like pure silvery white sparkle, and so I felt like it really contrasted against the green base, and that's just like, it's one of my favorite things is to combine cool tones and warm tones in the same look, and so I just feel like it gives this really dimensional effect to the eye. Now that I'm done rambling, I can actually show you how I apply it. So I like to tap it over instead of swiping, and in general when I apply my shimmers I prefer to do this. I find that it really works the shimmers like onto the lid and without like getting as much fallout, but especially for doing a shade cascade, I find that if you swipe the topper shimmer over the base shimmer, it meshes with it more, and depending on the effect that I'm going for, sometimes that's okay, but today I really want the silver sparkles to sit on top of the green shimmer, which is why I'm doing a tapping motion. Another way to get a really sheer layer of the topper shimmer is to use it on a very fluffy brush like this. It's going to give you a very dispersed sparkle. And this is typically what I use when I want to get into my inner corner again and also up towards the crease. I actually don't super love this disconnect that I'm seeing between the light matte and the dark shimmer over here, so I'm going to take a brush and fix that really quickly. I'm also going to add more of that sage green matte on top. I do feel like this shade is not as pigmented as the others, at least on me. I don't know what it is. I feel like I keep having to add more. I'm also going to add this silver sparkle in the inner corner. I just want you guys to see what this looks like with no other shadow layered under it, because it's a beautiful baseless shimmer and it's just so gorgeous and wet looking. The shimmer actually really reminds me of the Skin of a Killer highlighter from Bella Beauté Bar, but specifically the highlighter version and not the version that came in the Vamp palette, because I feel like this one that's in the highlighter has a slightly finer particle size, and the one that came in the Vamp palette, it's just like a little, I don't want to say chunky because it's not, but it just catches the light in a different way. And I feel like this shade in the Wicked Widow palette is more similar to the highlighter version. So this is Skin of a Killer highlighter, and this is Vain from the Wicked Widow palette. They are pretty similar, but they're not identical, because when you move them away from the light, you can see that Vain has a slight cast versus Skin of a Killer that doesn't really have much of a cast, because this was formulated to be a highlighter, this was formulated to be an eyeshadow, so there is a little bit of like, I wouldn't say a base, because it's not like there's a base pigment to the eyeshadow, but it's more like the sparkles themselves have a cast when you move them away from the light, if that makes sense. But they are very, very similar in like the effect that they have when you apply them on the eyes. I did my mascara and blush off camera, and I was about to do my lips, but then I realized that I wanted to use one of the glosses from the American Psycho collection. This is in the shade Raincoat, which has a clear base with like blue to purple shifting sparkles in it. And because it's got a clear base, I did want to put like a little bit of definition around my lip line. So I used the Mauve M147 lip liner, because this is like my favorite lip liner of all time, and now that I have a backup, I can go back to using this with reckless abandon. So I just did like a really sheer layer of it just on the perimeter of my lips. So I'm just gonna put this on and see what it looks like. I will say that this doe foot is on the smaller side, and it doesn't grab a ton of gloss from the component. Like when I was doing my hand swatches of these, I had to dip back in several times just for like that small swatch. And even now I definitely have to dip back in a second time to get enough gloss to like fully coat my lips, because this is like one light layer, but I don't feel like it's glossy enough, and I don't really see the sparkles too much. So I'm going to do one more layer. That's more like it. That looks like a proper gloss, and this is very, very pretty. It is like truly clear, so I'm really glad that I put that lip liner on. And also I feel like it helps to kind of like help the sparkles really pop, which they are visible right now. And I'm not even using my light that is meant to pick up on sparkles, but I can definitely see it even from my mirror that's like in my mirror that's a little bit of a distance from me. Like if I use my, hand, like this mirror, and I put it up close, like of course I can see the sparkles, but I can even see them from the further mirror. This gloss isn't gritty either, which is good, because I feel like usually when the sparkles are more visible, then like the trade-off is that the product gets a little bit gritty. So I really like that these sparkles are like decently visible. They're not like the most obvious, but you can see them, and the gloss isn't gritty. Aside from being non-gritty, this gloss feels really nice on the lips. I feel like, everyone's like, oh, this gloss is not sticky, but I feel like that's the bare minimum for glosses these days. Like formulations have advanced so much that your gloss better not be sticky, you know what I mean? This gloss though feels very cushiony and plush on the lips, almost like moisturizing, and I won't know how moisturizing it is until I've worn it more long term, but right now my lips, it feels very like plush. I also love how full it makes my lips look, because My lips, you know, they're not super thin, but they're also not very, very full. So I'm always looking for products that will, you know, increase the fullness of my lips. And I do feel like this gloss does that. Also, this gloss is scented. It's not super, super powerful. I noticed it most when I was applying it, when I had the applicator close to my nose. Now that it's on, I don't smell it as much, but the scent is a fruity vanilla. I had to ask the owner of Wicked Widow what it was because I couldn't like put my finger on it as I was swatching. I was like, it's a little sweet. It's maybe a little fruity, but I can't quite tell, but I did confirm with her and it's a fruity vanilla scent. Anyway, here's the final look. I'm very happy with how this turned out, so I'm gonna switch you over to the sparkle cam now. Here's the sparkle cam, and I think you can see how beautiful that silvery white sparkle is on its own, but also layered over this green over here. And like, this is what I love so much about the shade Cascade technique. It just gives you like the most dimensional finish to your eyeshadows. And I know that eyeshadows with multicolored sparkles are all the rage right now, but you can always just like create that from your own collection. I almost forgot to give you my thoughts on this palette. So I think the color story is really pretty. I do really like the split between like the neutral top and the more colorful bottom. And I think you can get like a really good variety of looks with this palette. That being said, I think my biggest criticism with this palette is the fact that a lot of these browns at the top are going to look pretty similar when you apply them on your eyes, especially these two darker browns. Like, those are going to look so similar on the eyes. So I just wish that there had been a bit more variety with those mattes, especially when you think about like how many lighter mattes you have over here. These two are extremely light and these two are a bit like, I wouldn't even necessarily consider them super mid-tone. There's such a big jump from the depth over here to the depth up here. So if a couple of these had been swapped out for more like in between depths and tones, I think that would have been a much better option. That being said, I think the variety in depth for the colorful mattes is excellent. You know, you have like both a lighter and deeper option for all of these. I will say I did have a bit trouble, you know, building up this matte in this look over here. So I'm not sure what the deal with that is, like whether it's just like a formulation thing or whether it's like specifically on my skin tone or because like my eyes are super dry right now. That could be it too. So I'll have to keep trying out this matte to see what the deal is. I do want to point out with the shimmers that there's only one shifty shade, and that's this one right here. And it's not a multi-chrome, it's more of a duochrome. It shifts from a blue to like a purple. The rest of the shimmers are more like, I don't want to say standard shimmers because like this one is really special. Like I pointed out, it's super wet looking. And even these two are super special. This one is very sparkly. And this one, I can't remember if I already mentioned, but I really love this shimmer. I think it's so special for being a neutral shimmer. It has like a rosy neutral base and then contrasting silver sparkles that just blend together to make such a delicious eyeshadow. And then this one here, even though it's a truly like a standard shimmer, I think it's still really pretty. So those were the three looks with the three palettes, and I'm really glad I decided to do this type of video. I've technically done a 4 palettes, 4 looks video before, but that was all one brand. It was all Gourmande Girls because that was my first time trying that brand, and I just wanted to give all of the palettes that the owner sent over like a solid test run. But this is my first time doing 3 looks, 3 palettes with 3 different brands. And I really enjoyed doing this video. I feel like it's such a good way to test out palettes that I haven't done dedicated overview videos for and kind of give you guys my thoughts on them as well as show you like what kind of potential looks you could get out of the palette. I think I'll probably continue doing videos like this for palettes where I'm not going to be doing dedicated overview videos for because I know that you guys really enjoy those videos for me, but it's just not possible for me to do a video for every single palette or collection that I receive. It's just like I would have to be doing like 3 to 4 to 5 videos a week, you know, in order to do every palette, but also do the other kind of content that I want to put out. But let me know what you thought of this video and whether you liked it, and also let me know which look was your favorite. And before you go, please don't forget to give this video a like, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!